finally March. We've had a bit of a rough February, but March is looking pretty good now in the long range forecast. So everything that I'm looking at, I'm going to put up at the side of the screen, probably at this side of the screen here. But this is the way it looks for me on my iPad. And of course, you can just look at exactly the same thing as me. If you want, just go down into the description and open it up on your iPad or your web browser or your iPhone or anything like that. And you can follow along with all the details. So there's no need to make any notes or anything like that. Not that many people will be making notes. Anyway, I thought I'd do a quick skim through some of the highlights from February, and then we'll get on to March and a quick look at April. So, all the onions are done. They're all growing nice and strongly. They're all in the polytunnel now. It's unheated. They don't mind a bit of a frost. So there's no protection on them, no heat mats or anything like that. They're all looking great. All the Asian greens pretty much are now planted, and those will benefit from a little bit of fleece if there's any frost for the first few weeks, basically, while they get hardened off. And they're looking really nice. I'm really pleased with the Asian greens this year. So Calabrese is looking pretty good. I've got most of that planted now, and I'll keep on planting multiple successions of that for a few more months, and then we kind of stop because we've been eating Calabrese for such a long time that we don't really need it, and we don't eat a huge amount of brassicas in the summer. So radishes, they're looking pretty good actually. I was looking at them yesterday, and I think they'll be ready for harvest in about a week's time, the first batch, so that'll be slightly earlier than we've ever achieved it before. So yeah, that's looking nice. Got a lot of lettuces planted, and I was actually looking at my December planted lettuces, and they are actually now ready for harvest. So that again is the fastest that I've got my spring varieties basically ready for harvest on the 1st of March from a December planting and a November sowing. So I'm really pleased to get spring varieties that quick. Leeks are coming up okay, but I have had one seed packet failed, well, not totally failed to germinate, but about 20% germination, which is pretty grotty. So I won't be using those seeds for any subsequent sowings, and I'll talk about that in a minute. All of my sort of second tranche really of salad onions are up now. At this time of year, or before this time of year, so basically January, February time, I like to sow salad onions that are bulbing onions. I find the taste is just amazing and super crunchy. So they're things like Leela, North Holland, Blood Red, Stir On, things like that. But from about March onwards, I stop doing that and I start just sowing again traditional salad onions, because otherwise they just try and bulb, and I don't want salad onions that are bulbing onions. I want nice parallel stems. Cucumbers are up, so I'm pleased about that. They're only little, like this sort of size, but that's kind of what I want at this time of year. So they'll be planted in the conservatory sometime in March. Potatoes are doing great. You can see them here behind me. There is one of them, and there's another one kind of out of shot over here, and they've got the first flowers on them, so that's really nice. Those are our early main crop potatoes, and actually maybe if I just shuffle over here, these are our early new potatoes, so just a little bit behind. New potatoes obviously come quicker than main crop potatoes. Next crop spinach is in, and that's looking really nice, and obviously all the overwinter spinach is in massive abundance at the moment, but it will start to go to seed in sort of late March, early April, and that's when this second batch of spinach will be ready. Peppers are doing really nicely. I'm really pleased with them. They're kind of up there on that shelf in those big grey trays, and I just potted those on into their bigger pots, and they're loving it in there. Next batch of broad beans, looking pretty good, and I've got flowers, quite a lot of flowers now on the broad beans in the polytunnel, and so they're looking really nice. So I would say mostly things are looking pretty good. There's a few like little areas of disappointment, but when you grow as many things as I do, you're bound to have a few things that don't work out perfectly. That's just part of gardening. Sowed all of my lettuces for planting outdoors in March, and they're not germinated yet. The peas are looking pretty good, happy with those. So I think that is me pretty much done with February. And so let's take a look at March. So I'm going to do a lot of leeks in March, so I don't do a lot back in sort of January, February time, just, I don't know, 100 or something like that. I'm doing 2 big batches of leeks in March. So the first one is ready for planting in early May, at the same time as I do my main crop, sort of winter brassicas, because I like to interplant them along the edges of the beds. And they do really nicely there, provided they get enough sun. So best off on the south side of those beds, if your beds are oriented east-west. I'll do a few varieties. Probably Pulbella is my favourite, but I'm going to try some blue, I can't pronounce it. Anyway, you'll see it up on the side here. Something I'm doing, which I've never done before, are super early French beans. I'm going to do those in a big container, sort of down here in the conservatory, sort of 50-litre container. I won't get a lot of French beans off that. I mean, basically like 1 meal, maybe 2 meals if I'm lucky a week, but I don't know, it's nice to have. I'm not sure it'll work. I've tried late French beans in the conservatory and they didn't really work. They put on loads of leaf growth, but not very many beans. So we'll see how they do. I think these will be in good leaf and growing quite strongly in April, and actually light levels in April are pretty good in this conservatory. So I'm kind of hopeful. And then I'll do another batch of dwarf French beans in about a month's time, and we'll see how they go, but they'll be in the polytunnel. So what else have I got? So I'm doing, I keep on doing kind of main crop potatoes, early ones, and they kind of go in greenhouses and cold frames and things like that. We like to have main crop potatoes all year round, and we just can't keep them in store for that sort of length of time. In fact, quite a lot of my stored potatoes now are actually starting to sprout a little bit because it's just been so warm this winter. Warm is probably the wrong description, but it hasn't really been very cold. I'll do my first batch of carrots. I'll start those in the polytunnel in containers. They'll live out their life obviously in those same containers, but they'll go outside in about April time. I don't like to keep them in the polytunnel for too long. I don't have a huge amount of polytunnel space, so I have to keep moving things. But I do like starting things in containers and then moving them outside as soon as the opportunity arises. And normally I do two containers every 2 weeks from now on for quite a long time. And that's just convenient for me. I'm going to do Mercurio for my early ones, and then I'll switch to Touchon, but I'll talk about that in a minute. I'll start my celeriac. It's not a very important crop for us, but it's worth just doing a few. Then I'm going to do my first parsnips. Now, I don't normally do my parsnips until sort of middle of April, even as late as early May. I'm doing them slightly different this year because I want an early crop and then a main crop. The early crop, I want to be harvesting those in September and October. And then I want them out of the ground so that I can plant spinach. And where they're going to get planted is a bed of spinach. And so what I'm going to do is clear that spinach progressively over the next few weeks, taking out alternate plants. And I'm going to put the parsnips in the gaps that I create in that spinach bed. I'm going to chip the seeds, so pre-germinate the seeds, and plant those pre-germinated seeds so they basically just get them a couple of weeks earlier. But because the spinach is in a cold frame, they'll be in a cold frame. I'll leave the lid on the cold frame so it'll keep the heat up and light levels good. and hopefully I'll get them, you know, quite early and growing quite strong in April. And that means hopefully that I'll get them in September, and then in October I'll harvest them, stick them in some damp compost in containers, and replant the bed with spinach. So that's my plan for my early parsnips. In fact, I've just finished a guide to growing parsnips. I'm really getting on with all of my growing guides. I've done, I don't know, like 10 of them in the last month or so. I'm pretty much keeping up with what I'm sowing. So if you want to look at my growing guides, then there's a link to those in the description, and they're pretty comprehensive. And yeah, I'm not saying they're perfect, but I'm pretty pleased with them. So I'm also doing my first early tomatoes. So I'm going to do Tumbler and Shirley's Pixie. We did Shirley's Pixie last year in autumn, and they were really nice. Debbie loved them. But the yield wasn't very good and the plants were big and leggy. So I'm hoping that done early in the season, that won't happen so much. These tumblers that I'm doing, I will be moving them from this conservatory into the polytunnel in sort of late April. And because they're in containers and they're small plants, they're really easy to fleece. So they should be, you know, I should be able to keep those alive, even though we do have quite a lot of frosts in May. Another batch of leeks. So this batch of how many, 144 leeks, those will be the ones that they're kind of like our main crop leeks, and they're going to get a dedicated bed. Now, I've never given leeks a dedicated bed before, but this year we're growing less winter squash, so I'm giving leeks a dedicated bed. So that I'm really excited about that, to see how well they do. Previously they've always been interplanted everywhere. I just haven't had space for them. What I'm actually doing is building a climbing frame for my winter and summer squash on the edge of the bed that these leeks are going to be in. So I am effectively growing squash in the same bed, but not horizontally. Oops, right. So then I come on to my brassicas. So I'm doing my early Brussels sprouts. I like to do a red variety, red ball in this case, and I'm doing brilliant. And so those are both the two early maturing varieties. In fact, red ball, maybe it's not an early maturing one, but we like it so much because of the red leaves, and we love the red, we eat the red leaves, and we like those just as much as the red sprouts. And the sprouts actually are super sweet and gorgeous, but they are tiny. And we eat, of course, the leaves of the green sprouts as well. So we're doing those. Then we're doing our 2 batches of red cabbage. And we're doing a bit more red cabbage than we've ever done in the past. We really like red cabbage, and we normally, it's the only hearting cabbage really that we grow, just because it's super healthy, and we all love it, and Debbie particularly loves it pickled. So yeah, lots of red cabbage this year. I think maybe this is my last batch of Calabrese, not 100% sure. I'm not even sure I know where I'm going to plant it, but I thought I'll just do one more batch. As I say, I've got so many successions of Calabrese going at the moment. I can't really afford the space for it now later on in the year. And then we're on to all of the different kales. Now, we don't do a huge amount of kale over summer because we don't eat a huge amount of kale over summer. Nobody does, I don't think. But we are doing Dazzling Blue, Nero Black Magic, Pentland Brig, Reflex, Scarlet, and that's it. So, you know, it's not a huge amount, only 2 or 3 plants of each. And that'll be more than enough kale to get us through summer and into autumn. We will do a late sowing, which is the one we'll eat in winter and spring when we eat a lot more brassicas. But obviously I'll come on to that later. I also plant out my Taunton Dean perennial kale cuttings at this time of year. So we've got, I don't know, about 10 cuttings, something like that. I'll pick the strongest of those, maybe 2 of those, and plant those. We've already got 2 plants in the ground that are growing really strong from last year, and we've got 1 plant from the year before, which will probably get cut down. I like to keep taking the old plants out, the old perennial kale plants, because they just grow huge. This one's about 8 foot tall, the one from 2 years ago. And then colettes. So colettes are one of our most important crops. They're the main brassica we're eating right now in February, and we'll be eating it in March, and we'll be eating it in April, mainly the leaves from it in April rather than the actual flower sprouts off the stems. It's a wonderful crop. We eat the leaves as well from sort of July all the way through the year. Yeah, and I will do another succession of that later on in April. I find it's useful to have 2 successions. It just kind of staggers the harvest a little bit. I'm also going to do my first early courgettes. I've also just done a growing guide to courgettes, which covers growing early courgettes as well as main crop courgettes. I like to do ambassador. I find it's a nice, compact, bushy plant. It grows kind of vertically, and so it's perfect for growing in containers, in the polytunnel, and it gives a pretty good harvest, almost at the point where we run out of winter squash. So we almost have kind of continuity in squash, not quite. Keep on doing successions of Swift, which is our preferred new potato. Got some down here. Just keep on doing a couple of these every few weeks. And I kind of stopped fussing around with starting them in small containers in next month sometime. But for now, it's the best way to do it. Start them in small containers and pop them on. And then I'm doing my main crop. Well, how do you describe this? My second early, no, maybe not. My biggest early crop of main crop potatoes. Oh, that sounds awful. I can't. Anyway, main crop potatoes for harvesting in July, basically. June, July time. And so I'm doing 10 seeds. They'll go in a cold frame, and I get a lovely early crop from those. I kind of start harvesting them sometime in June, maybe in the middle of June, finish harvesting them in early July so that I can get those beds replanted, and they last us all the way through until kind of the middle of August when we get our true main crop potatoes. So yeah, that was a bit of a jumbled description, but basically we will have main crop potatoes in April. That's what these are, but then we'll be finishing those in by the end of May, and then these are the ones that come in June. So hopefully you can follow that. I do have a guide to growing potatoes all year round if you want to see that. So then I'm doing just a few beetroot, not too many. I've already got loads of beetroot in the ground. There's quite a risk that these very early ones, not the ones that I'm going to sow on the 14th of March, but the ones that I've sowed in sort of January and February, that they will go to seed. That's not sometimes too bad, because actually often when beetroot go to seed, they're just as edible as they were before. They just stop growing. So they've got to have grown to a reasonable size at the point at which they start going to seed. But they don't get a woody core or anything like that. So hopefully that won't be an issue. But so I don't need that many beetroots, but I'll just do, I don't know, a tray or something like that. I do most of my beetroot later on in the year. It's a plant that really likes to grow in the warm weather, and of course I don't have anywhere warm for it right now, so it grows pretty slowly and it's not that reliable. So when you're doing some very early crops, it's best not to do too many of them, because there's a bigger risk of failure. So that's what I call a first early, and a second early generally are things that you don't do very many of those, but you put lots of effort into them because they're early. And then as you get to early main crops and main crops, those are the ones that are really reliable successions. So when you look at my growing guides, that's the way it works. You know, you always think first earlies, lots of effort, lots of risk. Second earlies, a bit of effort, not quite as much risk. Early main crop, next to no effort, next to no risk. Main crop, no risk, no effort, sort of thing. So then I'm doing my last succession of true spinach, and then we'll switch to Asian spinach because true spinach just goes to seed too quickly. I'm doing my parsley, and most of my lettuce has been done, and it's actually behind me there, but I will do 1/2 tray maybe of a little heart in lettuce, something like little gem or a maize. A maize is like little gem, but it's red, and that's a lovely one to do, and it's really nice and crispy, and it grows really well. But if I'd sown it when I sowed my others, it doesn't do so well. It's one that, you know, is best about a month later. So that's my lettuces. Then I'll do my first climbing beans, and they're going to go in a 50-litre container in the polytunnel and be wrapped with fleece, because climbing beans and dwarf French beans, they can't cope with a frost, so you've really got to make sure that the leaves are protected from a frost, and the only way to do that is to wrap them with a double layer of fleece. If the weather forecast says 3 degrees, wrap them with fleece, because, you know, they're just super tender. And although they will survive a bit of frosting on the leaves, it really knocks them back. So the end of March, I'll do my first batch of peas, outdoor peas. I've already got my peas in a low tunnel that are looking really lovely. So I don't need to do my outdoor peas super early. And I think I mentioned early on, I will do also 1 50-litre container of dwarf French beans to go in the polytunnel. So they're a month later than the ones that I'm doing in the conservatory. So that is pretty much it. And then it's just multiple successions of potatoes and carrots and things like that. I'll pot up my ochre. So that's currently little tubers sitting in egg boxes in the garage, and they'll start to sprout. In fact, I think some of them might be starting to sprout now. Basically, as soon as you see them start to sprout, just pop them up into compost and move them somewhere quite warm, like the windowsill, sunny windowsill or something like that. And don't plant them out until its risk of frost has passed. And then right at the end of March, I will do my tomatoes for the polytunnel, so my main crop tomatoes. Now actually this year I'm doing 2/3 of them probably as grafted plants that I'm buying. So although I've got them listed here as being sown in March, I'm not sowing them. Dobbies are sowing them. But I've got them in here just as a kind of reminder that if I were sowing them myself, this is when I've got to do it. And I will sow a few reserves just in case some of the grafted plants don't turn out very well. Now, last year when Dobby sent them to me, at least 1/3 of them just fell off. So they were grafted and the tops just fell off the bottoms. And so I had nowhere near as many as I needed. Now they gave me my money back, which is great. Well, it's not great, and it's kind of the minimum you'd expect. But that's not much use to you, is it? If you need the plants to plant. They didn't have any more to send me, so I was basically, I was pleased that I sowed some reserves. So that's what I'm doing as well this year. I'll sow some of my own, and then I'll give them away if the grafted ones arrive and they're healthy and they survive. So I've got quite a nice range. I'm splitting them between blight resistant and non-blight resistant, and cherries and cooking. And I'm also doing more outdoor tomatoes this year because the taste of outdoor tomatoes just seems to be better. And I'm doing multiple successions of my outdoor tomatoes because I like to do little bush ones, but they have a short, they're determinate, they have a short harvest period. And so I want to get those in succession to extend the harvest period outside. So I'll let you look at the details of all these different tomato varieties, but there's some really nice ones here. And that is March. Whew. Right, April. So I'm going to have to skim through this now because, as I said, April's a long way away. Lots of things change between now and April. But beginning of April, I put my sets, so I do a few hundred sets, onion sets, into module trays. And I start those in module trays. I stick them in the polytunnel and I grow them in there for 2 or 3 weeks, and then I'll plant them out. The only reason that I'm doing that is because I've got spring crops in the beds and I need to get those spring crops harvested before I can plant my onions. So that's the reason that I do it that way. I know some people start their sets way too early, I think, like now even, when they arrive. There's no need to do that. They're perfectly good big onions by starting them in sort of late March and early April. And basically I think that's the instructions that you get from the supplier. So that's what I stick with. And I've never had a problem. I've never had onion sets that haven't resulted in really great onions because I sowed them too late. Turnips and radish. So I like early turnips, so I've got early turnips in the ground now growing nicely. I find that if I do turnips in March, they just go to seed, but if I do them in April, then they don't. They kind of just miss that going to seed window. So I'll restart doing turnips and do turnips and radishes, which I do in one tray. And the way I do it is I do about 1/3 of the tray turnips, 40 cell tray. I do 1/3 of the tray French breakfast, and I do 1/3 of the tray Scarlet Globe. The Scarlet Globe come first, then the French breakfast come a week later, and then the turnips come about a week later than that, or maybe even 2 weeks later. So I do that every 2 weeks, and that gives me a nice kind of successional sowing. It works out nicely for me. I'll do my last succession of red cabbage, and that's just because I want a nice long harvest period up until sort of late winter. So we've got, red cabbage for Christmas, basically. And then I'll do quite a lot of beetroot. So I find that beetroot that gets planted out in May always seems to do really well. So I do a small number of beetroot early. That's just enough to see us through. And then I get lots of beetroot, so a couple of trays, 80 plants or something like that. And those will see us through until about October time, when we harvest our main crop beetroot, which we'll also put into store. So I'm going to do Cylindra and Burpees Golden and Bolt Hardy, so quite a nice range. I might do Pablo as well. And then I will do Touchon carrots. Now, I could do Mercurio. I like Mercurio early in the year, but the reason I'm going to do Touchon is because Touchon are my absolute favourite carrot for eating from summer all the way through until about now, really, so sort of late winter. And they keep in the ground really well. And I need to test the germination of them. So I'll do a few containers of Touchon, and then about 3 weeks later, I'll sow my first kind of early main crop batch of carrots, which will also be Touchon. But I need to check that they're going to germinate. So I'll do a few 3 weeks early. 4th of April, doesn't matter whether it's the 4th of April, early April, I'll do my next batch of parsnips. This batch doesn't really need to be chitted because it's not for early harvest. It's going to be harvested sort of in, what have I put here, October, sort of November sort of time. I always do about 4 seeds per station and then just snip off 2 or 3 seeds, however many extra ones germinate. And yeah, so what I also do about sort of middle of April is I start some main crop onion varieties to be harvested as little tiny onions in summer. And we find those are nicer than salad onions, spring onions or bunching onions or scallions or whatever you want to call them, in midsummer. What we do is just take out the outer layer of skin so that they're super tender and super sweet. And we plant these at a really high density, so about 200 per square metre, 250 per square metre or something like that. And so I like to do North Holland Blood Red for that. They're a beautiful onion. And yeah, so that's the way we do it. And that's the way we get really nice onions for salad, sort of at that time of year. And then we start again with salad onions a bit later on. So then I did mention, I think, that I'll do my second batch of Courgettes, and then my late season, so the Brussels that we'll be harvesting in sort of December and January and February, which are Breast and Fill Basket, and some more Red Ball, just because we, as I said, we really like the leaves, and they're just my favourite Brussels, even though the yield isn't really that great if all you're harvesting is the Brussels itself. So if you don't like Brussels leaves, Red Ball isn't a great one to grow, I don't think, because they're so small. But if you really love your Brussels and you really like leaves, then Red Ball's great. Mikado spinach, which is the Asian spinach, that's the one we do next. And we do that about, again, the middle of April. And we'll be eating that one until early summer. And as I say, it doesn't really bolt so quickly. So it's a better spinach. But we'll also start New Zealand spinach, which is actually the spinach that we'll eat all the way through summer and into autumn. And that's not a true spinach, but it works as a perfectly great spinach substitute. It's really lovely. It doesn't kind of go mushy like a true spinach does in a stir fry or something. It's really prolific. It's drought tolerant. As I say, it doesn't go to seed. It just keeps on going and going and going. It's a fantastic crop. You only need about a metre squared of it, something like 9 plants, and it'll keep you going like a family of 2 all the way through summer, so that's great. Chard, of course, is another great spinach substitute, so we'll start that about, again, the middle of April. And then we'll do our main crop. Now I've got this down as, I'm a bit confused. I'll make sure it's right in the actual version. But yeah, so then I've got my main crop courgettes for the polytunnel. And more turnips, and then golden purslane. So golden purslane is an amazingly succulent kind of salad. It's got tiny little leaves, but they're super succulent. You can eat the stems. It's really crisp. It's full of omega-3 fatty acids. It's our favourite salad ingredient, leafy green ingredient for summer. It's quite slow growing, so if you start it on the 15th in the middle of April, then you'll be planting it out sometime in May, ideally in a cold frame or something like that, because although it doesn't mind getting rained on, it doesn't like being rained on kind of continuously and being continuously damp. So being able to put a cold frame lid over it to protect it from the kind of August rain. So we often we get a lot of rain in August. It really doesn't like that. So that's why I do it in a cold frame. And then another batch of lettuce, small batch, just a kind of contingency in case the batch that I've just sown doesn't work out quite as planned. It's always worth having a bit of contingency for something that you eat every day. We have a big salad every day. And then it's my summer sowing of carrots. So in the ground. So that's 2 shon. We'll do about, 120 to 200 of those. That'll see us through most of summer. And then I'll have some more successions that come next month, so in May, which will see us all the way through until winter. And then we're on to the main crop, potato sowing. So I generally do that about the 22nd of April. I'm in no rush at all to do potatoes early because I've got loads of early potatoes. So I do them then because I'm pretty confident that those will be breaking surface after the last frost. So that's the rationale there. I have too many potatoes to protect them all with fleece and everything as well. So I really need them to come up after the last frost. Doing quite a few nice ones. Some more Swift, which is as I said, our preferred new potato. Cara, Estima, which is the best according to trials, but not our own taste tests. Bacon potato, Charlotte, which is just a tried and true potato. Nicola, which some people, Steve Digwell Greenfingers, claims is better than Charlotte, so we're giving that one a go. And then we'll do our sweet corn. So I'll do a few successions of sweet corn because I don't want them to all come at the same time. And again, this sowing of sweet corn should be okay to go out after the last frost. And then right at the end of April, I do my summer squash. So I'm doing I can never say this word, tromboncino or something like that. Yellow ball courgettes, ordinary courgettes, winter buffy ball, sweet dumpling, crown prince and curry. So quite a lot of squashes. Some of those are winter squashes, not all summer ones. And most of those are going to grow now in my new vertical climbing structure that I'm building on my plot. And some of them are going to go on debbies and grow horizontally, just like we've always grown squash before. So we'll see how growing them vertically works out. Last sowing of parsnips, sort of end of April. As I say, the only reason I'm doing them at the end of April, so you could do them in the middle of April, is just because I just don't have space until the end of April for them. And I could do them in early May as well, and that'd be just as good. And then end of April, I'll do tomatoes, first succession of tomatoes for harvesting outdoors. Whew, that is it, 37 minutes. That is a long video. So anyway, all the details down below, loads of growing guides, complete book telling you how to grow self-sufficient, all the different successions, all the interplanting strategies, all relay planting, successional sowings, all that sort of detail. You can find all of that linked in the description below. It was light when I started this. It's dark now. My name's Steve. This is the Seaside Kitchen Garden and Allotment channel, and I'll see you soon.